Thank you. Welcome to my presentation. I will talk about persecution and censorship of big beat and metal music during the communist era in Czechoslovakia. I will talk about rock and roll scene, big beat and metal scene in general, and then I will move to the situation in Wallachia region. So my presentation is based on two interviews with two musicians. One is former musician and he played totally in 3 big beat groups, and the second one is Petr Fiala from Czechoslovakian big beat band called Mňáka až Ďorb. So at first, some of the rock and roll, it came to the Czechoslovakia during the 1950s, and it was really popular among young generation. And basically the only possibility to listen to this genre was through Radio Luxembourg, which was really important also later for big beat and metal. Some of the most famous faces of the rock and roll scene in Czechoslovakia was theater actor Jiří Suchý, and he played also in a rock and roll group called Akord Klub, and he wrote lyrics to the group. When there appeared an article called I Saw the Rock and Roll, which reacts on the situation, he also reacted on the article because author of the article was scandalized and offended by the scene. So Jiří Suchý said that people like the author were always scandalized by new things, and that they are old-fashioned and can't understand such a scene because it's something new, and people like him are afraid of the new scene. Then in the 1960s came the big beat. Again, it was popular among young generation, and it usually inspired young boys to create their own bands, which was also the case of my participants. And the biggest rise was until 1963, when musical institutions helped and supported the young boys. However, the problem was that they couldn't speak English properly, and there wasn't almost any access to musical instruments, so they usually needed to create the instruments on their own. And as I said, it was supported until 1963. However, the musical institutions noticed that the quality of music was getting lower and lower, and also some rebellion during the concerts. And there was also this situation in 1968 that the Russians invaded to Prague, and the period of normalization started, which meant that music divided into 2 groups. One was what was acceptable, and the second group was the underground music. And also the problem was that the big beat was influenced by Western culture, which was of course enemy of Russia. So here you can see some of the Czechoslovakian big beat groups. However, in the 1970s, the new wave era came, which meant that punk and metal scene came to the Czechoslovakia. Of course, it was underground music, but it was problematic in different way. The problem was their visuals, because for serious communists, seeing metalheads with long hair and denim clothes was something really unacceptable. So there also appeared article about metal scene. It was named "The Cult of Violence and Death. Why?" And in this article, metalheads were accused of rebellion, anarchy, Nazism, racism, and all the bad things you can possibly imagine. However, in the 1989, there also appeared first Czechoslovakian metal movie called The Hot Porridge. So this is also what Petr Fiala during our interview said, that metalheads had it worse because of their looks. They were seen, they were visible, and they were something different that was really, as I said, unacceptable for the serious communists. And what is also important to say that metal was only some sort of entertainment for the young boys. So these are some of the Czechoslovakian metal bands. Now let's move to the situation in Wallachia region. It's in this part. An important thing is that Wallachia region is basically a countryside surrounded by mountains, full of villages and small towns. It's also one of the most religious parts, and people there are still living mostly through the tradition and the traditional way of living. So genres like metal couldn't get there so easily, so I will talk about Big Meat a little bit more. But it doesn't mean that metalheads weren't there. So as I said, there was a hard access to music. You could either buy illegal vinyls, go to the special discotheques, or also you could have right friends, but you never knew who was your true friend and who was the policeman in real life. So you could easily have a problem just because of the music you like to listen to. So when you were a band during this time in the Wallachia region or anywhere else, and you wanted to have a concert, you either need to do so-called playbacks, which was a defect control, which meant you needed to have a list of the songs you're gonna play. Then you played it in front of the committee and they gave you the points, and then you were free to go. And of course, when you played a concert, you played all the things that were popular among big beat and metal fans. And if you didn't do playbacks, you needed to have a so-called founder that was usually some sort of worker institution, and they guaranteed that your music, your set list is not politically defected. And you could get a stamp from them, and suddenly the police found out and they called them. They don't want them to support music like Big Beat, that it's unacceptable. And you could also do some music, some concerts, for example, on wedding. However, it could end up like there were police all around the garden, which this is also what happened to Petr Fiala. And all the people that were at the wedding were fired from work, and Petr Fiala was also kicked out of the university because he played the Big Beat music. However, both of the participants said that even though they needed to face this, they felt self-freedom and they could meet another people, they could escape to another life that wasn't affected by the political regime. So also Petr Fiala said that he see the reason of the persecution in the worry of something else and in the maintenance of power, because during that time, if you could do something, if you were good at something, if you're a musician or maybe a poem writer, you were immediately the enemy of the regime because they didn't want to lose their jobs and their places and money. And of course, Big Beat always reacted on the political situation. Metal were much more apolitical. They just had their own things, basically. And other important thing is that, as I said, Wallachia region is focusing still more on tradition than something what's modern. And if it was, during the time, if it was something about dancing, tradition, folklore, it was immediately supported by the Workers' Club, which was also founder for one of the groups called Lunochod that my participant played in. It was something like folklore and tradition. It was fine. It was something that was ours. Then, if it was big beat, it was something they shouldn't even care about. It was bad, it was defected, and they shouldn't support it. They just support them with one broken organs. And also, you didn't earn any money, basically, when you played the big beat concerts. But as I said, both of them were free, so they were lucky in that. However, there was a Velvet Revolution in 1989, which meant the fall of the communist regime, and now we have democracy and we can play whatever we want. We can say whatever we want. So my summary is that even though they needed to face being even beaten up when you went to the metal concert or big beat concert, you could end up really bad. Even though they needed to face persecution and accusations of nonsense thing, they still felt freedom and they could see world how it goes to somewhere else than not just going to work and back, go to work and back and listen to some things they didn't want to. They still could have their own freedom during that time. Petr Fiala even said that it was North Korea, but with food. So this is all from me. Thank you for your attention.